Akbar Ahmed.
Thank you, Hanif, and I'm like to say Mubarak and congratulations to our listeners for the month, the blessed month of Ramadan.
Thank you for that message. When did you first conceive of the idea of making a film about the Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah?
The idea began almost a decade ago. It was first the idea to do something about him on film, and that developed into what I call the Jinnah Quartet, which is a feature film called Jinnah with Christopher Lee and James Fox, a documentary, a separate documentary on him, an academic book called Jinnah, Pakistan and Islamic Identity, The Search for Saladin. This was published by Routledge last year, and a graphic novel for children. So there are 4 projects which were completed by the grace of God, and it was a long, difficult struggle, but alhamdulillah it was completed.
Well, as regards that book, Jinnah, Pakistan and Islamic Identity, The Search for Saladin, I can honestly say that I do recommend it because I've read it and it's an excellent book.
Thank you, Hanif.
Right. As regards the actual film, one controversial issue, and that is that the casting of Christopher Lee as Muhammad Ali Jinnah, it was controversial, wasn't it?
Yes, there were many controversies around the film. There was the casting of Christopher Lee as Jinnah. There was the selection of the director. There was selecting Shashi Kapoor in the film, who was an Indian. There were many controversies, but I believe that in the end they all worked out because the film speaks for itself. Christopher Lee himself is probably the best choice that anyone could have for Jinnah. He looks like him, he plays him with great sympathy, and he's getting excellent reviews from everyone, including Pakistanis.
That's good to hear. I know you had a limited budget for your film. How did you cope with this aspect of your production?
We had a very limited budget. It was a tiny budget, especially when you compare to Gandhi, and Gandhi, of course, was made almost 20 years ago, and yet it had a budget which was many, many times the size of our budget. But what helped me a lot was the help I got from Pakistan. For instance, many people helped me in terms of the crowd scenes, in terms of the hotels, in terms of the government buildings. So we had a lot of invisible help, which if you add it up in terms of a budget, it would mean that the actual budget would be much more.
I know Indira Gandhi helped the makers of the film Gandhi, and I think, was it former President Farooq Ahmed Khan Lagari who helped you?
Yes, President Lagari was very helpful. The army was very helpful. Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif was very helpful. He, in fact, invited Shashi Kapoor to Peshawar and as his personal guest and met us and so on. So a lot of people helped us. So these were the things that really made our budget much bigger if you look at it in terms of overall budgets, and allows the film a very big budget feel. If you see the film, you'll imagine that we spent much more on it than in fact we have.
Before we come on to the actual film and the purpose, one more question, and that is that, the actual shooting in Pakistan, it was fraught with tension and it became impossible at certain times, I understand. Why was that?
There was a lot of controversy around the film. I would say that there's a combination of ignorance, there's a combination of malice, there's a combination of jealousy, and some people were trying to oppose us, some people were spreading rumors, some of the journalists especially had picked up some wrong stories and were circulating them. It began with one journalist who wanted to play the role of Mr. Jinnah in the film, and he auditioned for it. He didn't get the role, so he was determined to take revenge on the film. So there were all these very silly reasons.
As regards the actual film, let's go to that. Now, Jinnah is portrayed in Attenborough's film and in many books, or not in many books I would say, but in the actual film, Attenborough's film, the Gandhi is the film I'm referring to, as a villainous, menacing figure. Now that's something that you want to get away from, isn't it?
That's right. One of the reasons I started this whole project was the portrayal of Jinnah in the film Gandhi, and in many of the history books. If you read the books written in India or Britain, Jinnah will be seen in a very negative light. So this is one of the great things that we grew up with in Pakistan. It was a legacy that you inherited, and I wanted to challenge it. It was a very big task because it meant really taking on the big names in history, the scholars, the writers. And by the grace of God, alhamdulillah, I would say that now there is a very serious reassessment of Mr. Jinnah, and I was very pleased to see over the last few weeks you've got some excellent writers writing excellent comments and reviews on Mr. Jinnah himself, all acknowledging what Christopher Lee said, that he was not one of the great men of the century, but one of the great men of all time.
The film is not a straightforward, conventional historical narrative piece, is it?
No, we wanted to make it interesting because otherwise we'd restrict the viewing and very few people would want to see it as film. I mean, maybe Pakistanis would be interested, but no one else. So that's why we try to bring new devices to it, so it will make it more interesting.
Some Pakistanis assume that among Indians there is a negative perception of Jinnah, which is monolithic. That is not correct, is it?
It isn't correct. There are many Indians, and we need to point out some of the outstanding scholars. I'll give you one example. For instance, Rajmohan Gandhi, who's Gandhi's grandson, who wrote a very sympathetic and a very respected account of Mr. Jinnah. So there are many Indians who are keen to understand what he was like, because without understanding Jinnah, you cannot really understand Pakistan or the Muslim movement. So it's imperative for both sides to understand them.
As regards the actual film, the content, why did you focus heavily on the relationship between Edwina Mountbatten and Nehru?
That was important, again, to show how personal chemistry was so important in decision-making which would affect the lives of many millions of people. Now, that, again, had been blacked out by most historians, and I had brought this out in a paper I wrote for History Today, which is an academic journal, a couple of years before the filming, bringing out this particular relationship and its impact on policy.
Okay, in light of the fact that Lord Mountbatten and Nehru come out in a worse light in the film, and the obvious bias, do you think that the Indians will be very unhappy about this?
I think anyone who's fair and who wants to look at history, I mean, remember, they see a film as entertainment and then they see what historical message it has. I think people who are fair will feel that we haven't been biased. We're really repeating or projecting history as it happened. After all, we didn't make up the affair between Edwina and Nehru. It's in her own diaries. It's in the biographies written of Nehru in India. Read M.J. Akbar's biography written a couple of years ago, which is a standard biography. They're all there, this documented, so there's nothing really that we are making up or propaganda or anything like that.
Right. Were you trying to emphasize how that relationship had a bearing on the British view of India, British India, and the partition?
Of course, because that influenced people, how they thought of Gandhi, how they thought of Nehru, and then on the other side, how negatively they thought of Jinnah. Because when Edwina was able to influence friends in high places and convey a certain impression of one or the other Indian political leader, that became part of the mythology of partition. So for years afterwards, people would assume that the good guys were this particular group and the bad guy was Jinnah.
Do you think then, after seeing the film, people in this country or all around the world will regard Jinnah as a towering, charismatic hero?
Yes, people are already regarding him as a towering hero. A lot of the write-ups that I'm seeing in Britain, in America, are regarding that, and they're saying exactly this. They're saying that this is one of the unique achievements of this film, is to bring out the great qualities of Jinnah and his heroic nature.
Considering the state of Pakistan as it is now, for example, with the endemic corruption that exists there, do you think that Jinnah would have been dismayed?
Yes, I think Jinnah would have been dismayed because he was a man of great integrity, and therefore I think the message is a very important one for Pakistan today, that Pakistanis must see where they're coming from, who their founding father, who the father of the nation was, and draw some inspiration from him.
So when will the film be released?
Soon, I hope. We are right now talking to various sales agents, and we should be able to tie up something in the next couple of days, and hopefully it'll be in your local neighborhood cinema soon.
Well, I look forward to it, and I can only commend you on behalf of all the people at Radio Ramzan, and I'm sure the listeners are looking forward to this. If you don't have any other comments, then thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hanif, and my regards to your listeners.
Thank you very much.